So I farm so hard the employees wanna find me, and then wanna hire me. What's 100K to a guy like me? Could you please remind me? Farm so hard, this ain't easy. Working late nights, you best believe me. My grades can only go ace. Never wanna see another B unless I'm Jay-Z. Farm so hard.
What's good, fam? It's your host, Jimmy Pruitt, aka PharmD and the ED, and I'm bringing you another episode of the Pharm So Hard podcast. I'm super excited to chat about this new study that just came out, and there's been, some talk about this in the community for quite a while now, and people like Andy Webb and a few of the others have really been chatting about the use of ketamine for status epilepticus and really looking at these benzo-resistant type. So I was super excited to be on Blue Sky. Andy published it on, well, as far as he put it on his Blue Sky. I keep wanting to say tweet, so I have to get that out of my vocabulary since a lot of us now are making the move over to Blue Sky, and it's tough. As we continue to talk about this study, and I think about the way that I was able to go about getting the information, it became intriguing to think like Twitter was such a community for us, and it was something that we were very used to. We knew all the hashtags, and everyone really had a pretty stable way about going about getting information. And recently, ever since the election, a lot of things have changed, and I don't necessarily have an opinion about the election. I do have an opinion of the community that's been built on Twitter, and that's been transitioning to Blue Sky, and we're losing some in the shuffle as well. So I want to really jump into this episode and talk about the way of actually capturing the information being on Blue Sky now compared to being on Twitter. And there's still some stuff there, and I'll continue to still be there. But I thought it was intriguing that I remember to ask myself, like, hey, I found this study on Blue Sky. And just saying that as I was recording, it just made it seem so different. But if you guys are out there, again, everyone usually have the same username. I'm going to be PharmD and the ED there as well. But let's go ahead and kind of transition to this study and give some background. I had a patient a few days ago, and before I went to mid-year, I had a patient that came in, got IM Versed in the field, came to us, we gave Keppra, what was still seizing. So of course we had that discussion of what should we do? Should we continue to give AEDs, or should we switch over and just intubate this patient and put him on some high dose propofol? And as we were doing that, my resident was there and was asking about the different induction agents. And I was like, why would you choose one versus the other? And I want to always have some data when it comes to choosing one versus the other. And she said, well, I want to use ketamine. And most of the time that's because my shop is a very heavy utilizer of ketamine. But in my head, I was thinking, man, I wish there was some data to say that if I have a patient that's in status and they are getting ready to get intubated, do I have an agent that I actually have data on? Because I think propofol, we know, has properties from an anti-seizure perspective, and the same thing for ketamine. But do we have any data that if I give this during intubation early, not giving ketamine drips 2-3 days later in super refractory and refractory status epilepticus, but if I give ketamine up front while we intubate this patient, will I have any difference in outcomes? And that's when this study came up. And again, it's going to be ketamine as a rescue drug for patients experiencing benzodiazepines. And I'll, of course, put this in the show notes. And this is a study we're going to be talking about and breaking down a little bit today. But before we get too much further than that, shout out to everybody who hung out at mid-year. We had a phenomenal time. The ED community is just phenomenal when it comes to that. And Cal went, Lance Ray, Ruben Santiago, Brian Gilbert, everyone that was out there, all of you guys from all over, Amy, again, everyone that I was able to kind of chat with, Chris Edwards. We had a phenomenal time at the get together. Bourbon Street is a very hard place to have a good time. So we made it work for those who wasn't able to join us. And as you know, again, there's going to be conference season for EM starting in April with the Empower RX conference coming up. That's going to be in Las Vegas, and we're going to have a tough time having a good time there as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this episode. So here's the deal. You've got a patient in status epilepticus who's already blown through your go-to benzos and maybe even a dose of Keppra, and they're still seizing. What's next? Traditionally, we'd reach for intubation, maybe high-dose propofol or another anti-epileptic. But what about ketamine? Can it help in these high-stakes moments? This recent study I'm breaking down today digs into just that. It focuses on ketamine as a rescue drug for patients with benzodiazepine-resistant status epilepticus. Here's the setup. The study looked at patients in benzodiazepine-resistant status epilepticus who received ketamine in the pre-hospital setting. The administration routes included intravenous, intraosseous, intramuscular, or intranasal, depending on the situation. What stood out? Ketamine rapidly terminated seizures in more than 98% of adults treated, with no recurrence during the pre-hospital and emergency department handover phases. The primary endpoint was seizure cessation during the pre-hospital phase. Across all cases, ketamine proved remarkably effective in achieving rapid seizure control. This level of efficacy is a game changer in scenarios where time is critical. Let's talk outcomes. Beyond seizure cessation, the study also considered safety metrics like the need for assisted ventilation or other interventions post-ketamine. For adverse effects, despite ketamine's reputation for causing hemodynamic instability, this study didn't show a significant increase in adverse effects. No clinically significant complications such as hypotension or respiratory compromise were reported. That's a reassuring point for clinicians. Now, for the dosing, the study's pre-hospital protocol for adults involved a fixed dose of 100 milligrams administered via IV, intraosseous, or intramuscular routes. For children, the dose was weight-based at 1 milligrams per kilogram. While intranasal administration showed some limitations, the overall results were consistently positive. So what does this mean for our practice? First, let's be clear, this is not a call to abandon traditional escalation pathways. Benzodiazepines are still the first line, and additional antiepileptics like Keppra or valproate remain essential tools. But this study highlights ketamine's potential as a highly effective rescue agent when benzodiazepines fail. Of course, there are caveats. This was a retrospective study conducted within a single EMS system, so while the findings are promising, they're not definitive. Additionally, it's important to remember that ketamine's effects in certain patient populations, such as those with catecholamine depletion like sepsis or shock, require careful consideration. But in your typical status epilepticus patient, someone who's missed their meds or has a known seizure disorder, ketamine might just be the game changer we've been waiting for. To wrap it up, ketamine's role in managing status epilepticus is evolving, and this study gives us a lot to think about. It's not just a rescue agent anymore, it's showing potential as a go-to option in refractory cases. For me, this is a reminder of why I love what we do. There's always something new to learn and another tool to add to our arsenal. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. This was a really cool one, and it gives me a little bit more to want to use ketamine for induction for these patients and to add ketamine earlier. But I can't really just stop here and say this is the best study in the world and we should just stop everything we're doing. I would love a lot more data. I would love for us to be able to get a few more studies to confirm this. To be honest, I'm probably going to end up looking in my own ED to figure out if this is something that we can continue to do and if I have data internally that kind of collaborate with this information. So that's how I'm going to use this. We use a lot of ketamine to begin with. Our pre-hospital, when they use ketamine as well. So it's not like it's going to be a huge changer for me, but I know other places and other shops I've worked at in the past, they've never used ketamine for the most part. Again, I always say I'm an 85-15 ketamine etomidate plays for induction. Other places I've been, it's been like a 90-10 for etomidate, mostly used compared to ketamine. So we have those things to really kind of go with. So depending on where you're located and what you want to use, there's some caveats to ketamine, let's be honest. If you're catecholamine depleted, I've been seeing a ton of patients getting the shock and continue to be worse off, even if their blood pressure doesn't always scream they're in shock immediately. There's a host of other things that your docs can do to assess if these patients are potentially catecholamine depleted. They've been in sepsis for a while. These are the ones where I'm a little bit more nervous. But then again, these are not your status patients to begin with. Most of my status patients are 20s, 30s, forgot to take their meds, did some other things that kind of pushed them over the edge. So again, a different patient population, to be honest with you. But it's something that I love ketamine, but also realize that there is a certain patient population that I probably will think twice about. For those patients, again, I'm always at a position if I have pressors available. If they're catecholamine depleted, I make sure I replenish their catecholamines to make sure I'm not getting hypotensive post intubation, because no one, and I mean no one, wants a post intubation cardiac arrest. I like boring tubes, and I think my docs do. Anyone is out there, once you get it beyond your 1,000 intubations, at this point, I just want it done right. And I'm pretty sure you guys do too. So that's kind of my 2 cents about this particular study, in this particular practice. And again, continuing to invite you guys to the Empower RX conference that's going to be held in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Rio Hotel on April 4th and 5th of 2025. Host of phenomenal things. We're switching some things up that allow it to be a lot more interactive, a lot more social events, a lot of cool things that we're going to be doing. I'm not going to continue to talk about that, but you guys can go to empowerrx/conference.com to find out more about that. And I think it's going to be pretty cool. So continuing to invite you guys there. Best speakers, best environments, best vibes. So without further ado, I'm going to close out every episode the way I do everyone. You don't have to be a pharmacist. You got to work in the ED, but everything you do, make sure you pharm so hard.
Closes it. Ozzy scratches his head. Whatever she's looking for, it isn't in there.